Welcome back to session 4 of Coding with Doc. In this session, what we're going to be looking at is the second of our big core programming concepts. So in sessions 1, 2 and 3, we've looked at, in the first session, algorithms, and then in the second session and the third session, this idea of sequences. So what is a sequence? A sequence is doing commands one after another, after another, after another. So this session, what we're going to do is look at the idea of selection. Selection, the idea of making a computer make a choice. Do I do this or do I do that? And then in future sessions, what we'll look at is the idea of iteration, doing things in a loop. Yeah, either a loop where we know how many times it's going to do it, or a loop where we don't know how many times it's going to do it. What's called a definite or an indefinite loop. So that's where we're going, that's where we've been. And in this session, what we're going to be looking at is this idea of an if statement. If you do this, or otherwise you do that, what we call an else. Otherwise you do that. If else, making a choice between two things. But to begin with, we're going to do some more predicts. So please can I get you to get a pen or a whiteboard, however you've done this on the other sessions, to watch that through and to make those predictions. Now remember, you're not having to get these right. That's not the aim. The aim is that you're reading the code, you're getting familiar with code, you're getting an idea of the patterns within code, you're looking at it and you're saying, what would this do? And you're making a guess. And that will get you more used to it, more familiar with it, less intimidated by it, stronger at doing code in the first place. The first example I want to do this time around, the predict exercise, is to look at that piece of code. So you've got num equals an int input. Now, hopefully you'll remember what that does from the previous session. Yeah, an int input, enter a value less than 20, double bracket. And then it says something which we've not done up till now. It says, if num greater than or equal to 20, and then it's indented and says print too high. Then it comes out of the indent and says else, and then it goes print thank you. So what does it do? Now, if you've got a whiteboard in front of you, write it down, otherwise just clock it in your head or put it down on a piece of paper with a pen, and then try and answer the questions. What would happen if I put in a number 25? What would happen if I put in a number 10? And what would happen if I put in a number 20? What would happen in each of those scenarios? So in terms of working through the what would happen, let's just do it. Let's make the code. Let's see it. So back into Trinket. And obviously when I'm in Trinket, I've logged in and I've gone on to new Trinket and I've gone on to Python as I normally would. And it's brought up my Trinket. And then I go num equals an int input, so a number input. So ask a question and know that the answer must be a number. Enter a value less than 20. And that's going to let me type in a number, and it's going to store it in a container in the computer's memory called num. And then it says if num, what's in the container, is greater than or equal to 20, print too high. Now, it's doing that just for the ones that are greater than 20, just for when that's true. Now, you could print something else as well and make that part of the condition. But then, coming out of that, we want to say, now, anything else, anything that's less than 20, print thank you. So in terms of how that then runs, it's looking to see is the number less than 20. That's what the code's doing. And if I put in the number 25, it says too high. If I run it again, and this time around I put in the number 10, the ones that I posed on the question, this time it says thank you, because it's lower.
And if I put in the number 20, this is where you might have gone wrong. This is kind of the boundary test, but it's greater than or equal to 20. So it still says too high. So that's given you that kind of work through of that predict example. Now, where I want to go now is to look at an exercise where I'm hoping you can then work with me. So I'm going to take something very similar to that. We're going to do a variable, except this time we're going to call the variable, instead of calling it num, we're going to call it age. So it's just changed the name of the box. There's nothing wrong with calling it num. We could have left it as num, but we'll call it age. And we'll say, how old are you? Question mark. So we've got there a question, and we say if the age is greater than or equal to 18, greater than or equal to 18. Now you can just put 18 not in quotes, and the reason for that is because we've done the int input, and it recognizes 18 as a number, so it recognizes the greater than command. And we put print you class as an adult and can vote. So when you're 18, obviously you get the vote in the UK. And then else we put print you are classed as a child and cannot vote. There's obviously debates at the moment about changes in the voting age. So you can put those down now. Let's just first of all run that, see how it works. So if I put in an age like 17 and press return, it says your class as a child and can't vote. Whereas if I run it and this time around I put in 18 and press return, it says your class as an adult and can vote. So you can see it's working in the same way as the previous time round. Now, what happens if I miss that colon at the end of the if statement? What happens then? It crashes, and it crashes on that line, and it says there's a bad input, yeah, which means that I'm missing that. Equally, if I'm missing that and I run it, what happens? Again, it tells me there's an error. There's an error on that line. It's missing the colon. What happens if I don't do the indent and I run it without the indent? Well, it crashes on that line. It says, I don't know what to do on that if statement. You've not told me anything to do. What happens if I put the else indented as well and run it? Well, at that stage, it crashes on the else and says, when do you want me to run this? There was no if to go with it. There needs to be another if inside the other if statement if that's going to work. So it needs those indents. One indent to say those are working together. The if leads to this thing. Now, you could add more things, and more things in the sequence. You can go print hello, and then print hello again. You can do as much as you like inside the indent, but it's got to be indented. So now if I trigger that one, we go 18. It goes hello, hello, after it's said your class as an adult and can vote. It's done both of those two things alongside the other exercise. Now, I have a question. And with this question, I'm going to stop because you've had a chance now to make a run. You've had a chance to make an investigate. I want you to have had a play with all of that. But now, finally, the last thing I want to just pick up with you is this one. I want to get you to look at that question. Can you alter that code to stop it including an age that's over 100 or under 0? Can we tweak the code to do another check? In effect, if you're going back to our session 1 where we had milk and then sugar, can you make it so that it's got another check in there that then says what happens if they are this? See how you get on with that one.
So just before we get through to if statements, I'm going to take that modify example and I'm going to do a small piece of code where we're looking at weight. Now, you're going to say, you look like you're ready to talk about weight. But what I want to do is be able to make a converter that looks at your weight here on Earth. What would be your weight on the sun? What would be your weight on the moon? And can we make a bit of code that will do all that? So straight into that next little clip.
So then, let's work through the answer to that question about how we can tweak it, how we can twist it. And really the answer is, up here we need to do another if. We want to say if, and we probably want to ask two questions. If age is greater than 100, now if we put that in brackets, it tests that and says, is that true? Or age is less than 0. So that's allowed us to do two things in one go. We can then go print that is not a correct age. Now, if we run that and just see how that works to begin with, you'll see that if I put in 101 and press run, if I put in 101, it says that's not a correct age, but then it still runs this one and says you're classed as an adult and can vote, even though it's not a correct age. And equally, if I run it and put in, say, something else ridiculous, like -2, it says that's not correct age, classed as a child and can't vote. So in effect, it runs them both. It runs the first if statement and the second. So then you kind of want to put this as an else, but then you can't have two else's. You wouldn't know which one to run. So the answer is there is a command that allows you to do otherwise if. Otherwise if. So only if it passes that first one, otherwise if then they're 18, otherwise do this. So now if I run it and I put in a number that says 101, it just says that's not correct age. If I run it and I put in -2, it says that's not correct age. So that triggers on the first lines 2 and 3. If I run it again, and this time round I put in, say, 19, that triggers on lines 4 and 5. And if I run it again, and this time just put in, say, 10, that will trigger lines 6 and 7. So that's triggering the else condition. So it gives you those different steps to each one. Now, I want to then step to a make example. And again, like the previous one, pause the video if needs be at this point. Have a go away. Don't leave it just running with me explaining the next answer. Have a crack at doing it yourself on these make ones and see if you can do this next exercise. So this next exercise asks you, as a make exercise, can you write a program that works out your weight on the moon and on the sun? Now let's try and do weight as if it's in kilograms. To have a broader worldwide appeal will that, and it's probably easier to code as well rather than stones and pounds. And my American friends will be wondering what stones are and maybe want to go and check that. So working out in kilograms, remember in a kilogram, you can just put the weight. You'll need to look and think, how does that impact? So I've told you that on the moon, you are 1/6 of your weight on Earth. Yeah, that's why you see the astronauts bouncing around on the moon. If we were on the sun, we'd be 27 times heavier than we are already on the Earth. And as a basic working example, the average 8-year-old child is about 50 kilograms. So that gives you a chance to kind of work that out then, to work out. Now, what I would love you to do is write a program that asks you the weight, so an input, asks you the weight, then does an asks you whether you want to do the sun or the moon as a second store, and that's stored in a second variable. So there's one that's storing the weight and one that's storing the choice of the place, the sun or the moon. And then, depending on which one you've picked, it then does, if you pick the sun, works out your weight times by 27. If you pick the moon, works out your weight divided by 6, and then prints that out. Now see if you can make that work on your own. So now let's model that answer, and then I'll give you a second challenge before we hit the third big challenge. So on this one, I would do something like a print. Welcome to working out your weight around the galaxy. Just an introduction. You obviously don't need that. And then I do the first of those questions. So I do a weight is, now there's a choice here, a float input or an integer input. If a float, it allows you to put a decimal, so I can put 12.5 kilograms, or am I just going to force somebody to round up or round down? I think I'll force somebody to round up or round down by saying int input. And then I'll put, what do you weigh in whole kilograms? So you've got what do you weigh in whole kilograms? And then choice equals, now choice is just going to be an input. There's no need for choice to be a number of any kind. So do you want to know your weight on sun or moon? Now, I've put them in capitals because that's what I want them to type in, sun or moon. So it allows me to work that out. Then I want to actually do that calculation. So I'm going to say moon equals weight divided by 6. So irrespective of which one they pick, the computer will have worked out the answer. And I'm going to go sun is weight times by 27. So that's worked out those two differences. And then I want to say if the choice equals sun. Now, some of you will say, why have you put a double equals there, not a single equals? And that enters into a rather interesting little area. This one, exclamation mark equals, mean it's not the same as sun. Equals means it is the same as sun. And we've already done greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. So we've already picked up those greater than or equal to or greater than or less than signs. It's just this equals that you need in an if statement with a word, and exclamation mark equals, which you might find useful in the future for meaning not the same as something. So you've got, if the choice is the sun, I want to print on the sun you would weigh. And then I can either use a comma or a full stop. It doesn't really matter. But I want to put in the sun variable, the sun little container there that contains that answer. That's what I want to appear after it's printed that statement about the sun. And then I want to drop a line, come in again, say else, otherwise, do this one. And I'm going to say print, so presumably now they've picked the moon. On the moon, you would weigh. And then I'd do the moon. Now if I run that, it says, what do I weigh in whole kilograms? And we'll go with that small child example. So we'll say 50. Do you want to know the weight on the sun? And we'll go sun. And it says on the sun, you'd weigh 1,350. Whereas equal, if I run it again, and this time around I put 50 in again, the small child, and I put moon, and press return, it says on the moon you'd weigh 8.33 kilograms. So it's working out that as being a lot lighter. Now, some of you might have noticed there's a slight issue there, where you might want to go sun or sun or sun. You can also do something here with the choice. You can say choice equals choice dot upper. And what that will do is make it all into capitals, whatever they type in. So if I just hashtag that out to begin with to show you what the problem was, if I run that, and this time around I've put in 50 as my weight, but I put in sun in lowercase, it tells me the moon answer. Whereas by telling it you must change whatever's been typed in choice to uppercase, if I've just typed in 50, if I've just typed in 50, and then I've put in sun, put it in one uppercase and all the rest lowercase, yeah, it didn't like upper. Right, upper and small. I lost the bracket on that first one. I don't know, I've done that in my kind of moving around, but you see how that's just picking up these errors, looking at where the error is, looking at why the error's there. It's often a little technique that you just learn and you get used to doing as you're going through. So now I put in sun in small case, and now it still tells me on the sun you would weigh. Yeah, I needed to put upper as a lowercase command, not an uppercase command. So that gives you then that second, that first rather make example. And now I want to look at a second make example.
So we've done a series of modifies, and now's the time to do a make. And on this make, what I want to do is lunge into this idea of selection properly for the first time. And where we're going to begin is on a simple password system. So quite often on an iPad or on a computer, what you want is a choice where you're saying to somebody, type in a password, type in a username. If it matches, the password matches, let them in. If it doesn't, don't let them in. And that's where we want to begin with our first make challenge. That idea of building a basic password system.
It's asking you, can you write a short program that uses an if statement on a password and checks whether somebody can enter or not enter? So in effect, you're making a password program. It asks you to type in a password. So there's an input statement that has to type in a password, and then a check on that password that says, if the password is let me in, then it says welcome to the club. If the password is not let me in, it says you're not welcome to the club. So I'm wanting, can you make that kind of password statement based off what we've just done?
We'll work through the answer to that password system and how you've done it, and just look at whether it matches the way that I've done it. And if it's similar, great. If it's not so similar, hopefully you can follow what I've done and think, all right, yeah, I've got that idea now. And then what we're going to go on to is doing 3 more make challenges, just like we did on session 3 and like we'll do on the future sessions. 3 separate little challenges which test your idea, test your understanding of those simple if and else statements, where you're making the computer make this decision as to, am I going to do this or am I going to do that?
So modelling that answer, you do a print that says, welcome to Doc's not very secure password system, or some such thing. And then you'd have password. Now, because password's going to be just a word and we don't know what it's going to be, it could be words, it could be letters, it could be whatever, it's just going to be an input. And we're going to do an input that says, please enter the password. And if we give it a space, it just allows the person not to then type a space in at the start. And we go, if password is the same as double equals let me in, colon at the end, always a colon at the end of the if. Now the indent, we go print, welcome to the club, and then we do else print, you are not welcome until you know the password. And if you run that, it says please enter the password, and if we put in a password of say James and we press return, it says you're not welcome to know the password. If we run it again and this time around we put the password as let me in, it says welcome to the club. And that's fine as an answer to that second make challenge. Now I want to look at the third. Now the third's asking you, on the red challenge, let the person type in a number that's under 20. And if they type in a number that's under 20, say thank you. But if they type in a number that's over 20, say too high. And we've done examples that are very, very similar to that. The amber one, ask them to enter a number. If it's under 20, put too low. If it's between 10 and 20, say correct. Otherwise, say too high. Now, that's a twist on what we've already done. And then green, ask them if it's raining, so words. Convert the answer to lowercase. Now, that's exactly the same as we might have just done with the password, with the sun and moon one, but instead of using upper, use the command lower. So you can transfer something to being lower by just doing lower, L-O-W-E-R, bracket, bracket. If it doesn't matter what they type in, so you ask them if it's raining. If they said yes, it asks them a second time, is it windy? So if they said yes to raining and yes to the wind, you say it's too windy for an umbrella. If they say yes to raining and no to the wind, say take an umbrella. And if they say no to the fact it's raining, then say enjoy your day. See if you can get whichever one of those you fancy to work. Join me after the adverts and we'll work through those answers. And by all means, pause if you need to pause in order to work on those in the meantime.
Hope you're finding these challenges fun. I'm going to work through the answers to those three just now. If you're enjoying this sequence of videos, as I've said before, please subscribe. It helps us both to keep in touch. It helps you to stay in touch with the content. It helps me to see that people are actually valuing this stuff. And if you're an ex-student or an ex-colleague and you want to get in touch, or you want to get in touch via the website, please do so. All the materials for all the things that I'm covering are on there. No, without further ado, let's get on to the question of what were the answers to those challenges.
Let's model the answers to those questions. The first one is simply going, number is probably a whole number, so we'll do an int input. Now, of course, if you prefer it in 2 lines, you can do it in 2 lines. Enter a number that is less than 20. So we've asked for a number that's less than 20, and then we go, if number is greater than or equal to 20, then print that was too high. And then we want the else, so back in from the indent, always the colons at the end of each one, print thank you. And that would work for the red example. Now, let's then turn to the amber example, Now, the amber example, if you remember, we still wanted a number coming in here, so we'll keep that first one. In fact, we'll keep up to there on the first test. So we'll say if the number is less than 10, print too low. Then we want to do another test. So this is one of those examples where there's 3 tests. It's not just if this or that, else that. You know, it's one where there's an other, it might be this, if otherwise type one. So how we did that, if you remember, was an elif, and you do elif number, and in brackets, number is greater than or equal to 10, and in brackets again, number is less than or equal to 20. So there you've got an elif condition, and there you'd say print correct. And then finally, an else condition where you go print too high. And that would give you the answer to the amber question. Then finally, the one about the rain and the umbrellas. So, distinctly British question. So, raining equals an input that says, is it raining? Yes or no? In fact, yes or no, colon. Now, I've put them in capitals, which is almost encouraging them to put it in wrong. And then we go raining equals raining dot lower. So change whatever they said as the answer to raining, however they've written yes or no, change it to lowercase. And then we've got if raining is the same as yes or lowercase, because it's impossible to have that as anything else because it can't now be anything else. So if you capitalize that yes, none of the program will work at that stage. We then go windy equals an input. So it only asks the question if the answer is yes. Is it if it's windy or not? So we then go, is it windy? Yes or no. Now you'll see I've took that question inside the yes of raining. So that's making it only come up when the raining is yes. And there we say windy equals windy dot lower. So that'll also convert that answer to a lowercase. And now we're going to put the answer to that one still inside the if of the yes of raining. So we're still indented. So if windy is the same as yes, then we want to print it is too windy to take a brolly with you, an umbrella with you. And then else, if they've said no to the windy, we then say, please take an umbrella. And then if the if the raining question was no, it's not raining at all, we then say print enjoy your day. So that gives you an if inside another if. Now, we've not done that up till now, so that would have been clever if you got that right. So now, is it raining? And we put in yes. Is it windy? And we put in yes, and it says it's too windy. If we run it and we say, is it raining? And we say no, it says enjoy your day. And if we run it and we say, yes, it's raining, but no, it's not windy, it says please take an umbrella. So we've got the green example working as well.
I hope you've enjoyed this fourth session of Coding with Doc. There'll be more to come. We've got a beginner sequence, we'll have an intermediate sequence, we'll have an expert and an advanced sequence. The advanced will be clearly aimed at much older year groups, at A-level students in the British system. But it's all about building up your strength and your ability to code so that you are a strong, confident coder in Python. And this beginning sequence that's looking at sequence selection iteration is your first step on that journey.
If you want in a really great way to practice your coding, so that you're focusing just on the kind of the routines and not the actual code itself. Try this one. Put into Google Toxicode. You can see it's there, compute.it. And all it asks you to do is to make these movements. So this one, right, easy. And then it takes you to the next one. Go down, go left, up, easy. But then it'll go around and eventually it'll give you loops, it'll give you decisions, it'll give you all the sorts of things we're talking about. Down, right, 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 down. Notice that one, that was clever because the colours in the background didn't match the instruction. Down, and then repeat 3 times right. So 1, 2, 3, and then go down. Brilliant little game for teaching you, tool for teaching you how to code.